Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The youngest ones always believe the fastest. That was the problem. Nolly had watched it happen too many times. Some older kid would fill their heads with sweet stories about parents coming back, about wars ending, about some magical figure who flew across the sky, giving gifts to children who had been good. And then the little ones would wait. They would wait by the doors, by the windows, by their cots. And nobody would come. And the light in their eyes would die just a little more. She refused to let that happen again. That it was a cold evening at Briar Hill Home, the only orphanage on the colony world of Haven's Rest. The building was old and tired, just like everything else on the frontier. The walls were patched metal. The heating system groaned like a sick animal. 43 children lived here, 26 humans and 17 aliens from 5 different species. All of them left behind by a war that the politicians said was over but nobody really believed had ended. Brother David, the head caretaker, was a Peluri, tall, pale-furred, and endlessly patient. He moved between the cots, tucking in blankets and checking on the little ones. He did not fully understand human children, but he loved them with everything he had. In the common room. The older children sat in a loose circle. Ren, the eldest at 12, was speaking quietly. He had a faraway look in his eyes. "It is almost December 25th, he said. Back on Earth, they called it Christmas. A small sorcerer girl named Tilla sat pressed against Nolly's side. Tilla was 6 years old, blue-skinned, with enormous dark eyes that never seemed to blink. She had not spoken a single word since arriving at Briar Hill 8 months ago. Whatever she had seen during the border conflicts had locked her voice away somewhere deep inside. "Christmas," repeated a younger boy. "What is that?" Before Ren could answer, Nolly cut in. "It is a lie," she said flatly. "A story humans made up a long time ago. They told kids that a fat man in a red suit would fly around the world and give presents to every good child." She looked around the circle. "You're all good. You have always been good. And nobody has given you anything." The room went quiet. Ren stared at her. "It was not just about presents, Nolly." "Then what was it about?" He opened his mouth, but could not find the words. After a moment, he stood up and walked to his cot without saying anything else. Under his thin pillow, hidden from everyone, was a piece of paper he had drawn on months ago, a green triangle with a yellow star on top. A Christmas tree. He touched it once, then turned to face the wall. Brother David had watched the whole thing from the hallway. He did not know what Christmas was. He did not understand why Ren looked like he had been punched in the chest. But he understood loss. Every child in this building carried it like a stone in their pocket. He turned away and went back to his work. There is nothing he could do about Stones Point 3 hours away by transport. At Fort Dawnridge, a soldier named Roe Cafferty was sitting on the edge of a medical cot while a doctor checked his leg. The injury was 6 weeks old, shrapnel from a collapsed building during an evacuation that went wrong. The building had fallen before he could get the last family out. He still heard the sounds at night. "You are cleared for light duty," the doctor said. "Supply runs. Nothing heavy." Cafferty nodded and said nothing. That he found his assignment posted on the board an hour later. A routine delivery to 3 civilian outposts, including Briar Hill Orphanage. He pulled up the supply manifest on his tablet and scrolled through it. Protein packs, water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, thermal blankets, nothing else. That he stared at the list for a long time. Then he looked at the delivery schedule. He would reach Briar Hill on December 24th. Cafferty put the tablet down. He sat in the empty hallway and pressed his hands together. His knuckles were scarred and rough. His eyes were tired. He was 34 years old, and he felt like 60. He found a fellow soldier passing by. "What is the date?" he asked. "December 22nd. Cafferty closed his eyes. 2 days. He had 2 days. He stood up, and for the first time in weeks, he walked with purpose. Nobody at Fort Dawnridge noticed when Cafferty changed his route. The supply transport was a heavy, ugly vehicle built for hauling cargo across rough terrain. It had no comfort features, no music system, and a seat that felt like sitting on a rock. Cafferty did not care. He had driven worse things through worse places. The official route went straight from the base to the 3 outposts. But Cafferty turned east at the fork in the road and headed toward Millward Station, a small trading post that served the frontier settlements. It would add 4 hours to his trip. He would have to drive through the night. That was fine. He had not been sleeping much anyway. Millward Station was the kind of place where you could buy almost anything if you had the credits. It was loud, crowded, and full of species from across the cooperative. Cafferty parked the transport behind the main building and walked in. He had a list in his head, not on paper. He did not want anyone to see it, that he moved through the stalls quickly. First, he bought fabric, cheap, colorful rolls of it in red and green and gold. Then sweet rations, the kind they gave soldiers on long deployments, each one wrapped in foil. Then color dyes, small bottles of them, the kind artists used. He found a stall run by a local alien craftsman who carved small figures from the pale wood that grew near the colony. Cafferty bought 12 of them. Tiny animals, tiny ships, tiny stars. The craftsman, a four-armed creature with deep brown skin, watched him with curiosity. "You are buying children's things," the craftsman said. "Yes." "You have children." "No." The craftsman said nothing more and wrapped the carvings carefully. Cafferty found battery-powered lights at another stall, a long string of small white bulbs, the kind used to mark paths in mining tunnels. He bought 2 sets. Then he found synthetic wool, soft and warm, the kind used for lining winter coats. His credits were running low. He had one more thing on his list, and it was the most important one to AKT the back of Millward Station. There was a stall run by an old Peluri named Oso. Oso dealt in earth goods, rare items that came on the long-haul ships from the home system. Most of it was overpriced junk. But behind the counter, in a sealed container, Oso kept a small supply of real chocolate. Chocolate was almost impossible to find on frontier worlds. It had to travel for months across space. A single bar cost more than most people earned in a week. Cafferty did not have enough credits. He stood at the counter and thought for a moment. Then he reached to his hip and unclipped his sidearm, a handgun that had belonged to his grandfather. It was old, beautifully made, and worth more than everything else he owned. Oso looked at the weapon, then at Cafferty. "That is an antique," Oso said. "I know what it is. You want to trade it for chocolate? All of it. Whatever you have." Oso studied him for a long time. Then he reached under the counter and brought out the sealed container. Inside were 6 large bars of dark chocolate, each one wrapped in silver paper. "Why?" Oso asked. Cafferty picked up the container. "Because someone did it for me once." He did not explain further. He walked back to the transport, loaded everything in the cargo bay next to the official supplies, and climbed into the driver's seat. As he drove through the dark, he began working. He kept one hand on the wheel and used the other to cut fabric into rough shapes. Stockings, the kind he had seen in pictures when he was a boy. His hands were thick and clumsy. The stitching was uneven. Some of the stockings looked more like bags. He did not care. He wrapped the small carvings in scraps of colored fabric. He twisted the sweet rations into little bundles. He broke the chocolate into small pieces, one for each child, and wrapped them individually in foil. While he worked, a memory came back to him. Sharp and clear, the way memories do when you've been running from them for years. He was 8 years old. The orphanage on Earth was cold and gray. There were 30 children and not enough blankets. Nobody talked about Christmas because nobody wanted to remind the children of what they did not have. But on December 25th, a man walked through the front door. He wore a red coat, not a costume, just a regular red coat. He carried 2 large bags. Inside were small gifts, one for each child. A toy car, onitid hot, a bar of chocolate. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy. Young Cafferty had received a small wooden figure of a dog. He held it in both hands and stared at it for so long that one of the caretakers asked if he was all right, that he was all right. For the first time in his life, someone had remembered he was there, that he never learned the man's name. He never saw him again. But he kept that wooden dog for 15 years until it was destroyed in a fire during his first deployment. Cafferty wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and kept driving. It was past midnight when the lights of Briar Hill appeared on the horizon. December 24th. He was right on time. Brother David heard the transport before he saw it. He had been sitting at his desk, going through the same supply request forms he filled out every month, when the low rumble of an engine broke the silence. He stood, pulled his coat tighter around his tall frame, and walked to the front entrance that a military transport sat in the yard with its headlights cutting through the dark. A soldier climbed out slowly, favoring his left leg. He was a big man, broad shoulders, rough hands, a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile a long time ago. Sergeant Roe Cafferty, the soldier said. Supply delivery. Davin checked his records. The delivery was not expected until morning, but soldiers on the frontier often ran ahead of schedule. He led Cafferty to the storage room and watched as the sergeant unloaded the standard supplies: protein packs, medical kits, water tablets, thermal blankets. Everything was in order. Davin signed the receipt. Cafferty did not leave. He stood in the hallway, holding the receipt, looking toward the common room where the children slept on rows of cots. The room was dark and quiet except for the small sounds of breathing. Are they all asleep? Cafferty asked. Davin tilted his head. Most of them. The older girl, Nolly, she does not sleep well. Why do you ask? Cafferty was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have more supplies. They are not on the manifest. Davin blinked. I do not understand. Can I show you? They walked to the transport together. Cafferty opened the rear cargo bay, and Davin stared at what was inside. Colored fabric, strings of lights, small wrap packages, a bundle of something that smelled rich and dark and sweet, a smell Davin did not recognize. What is all of this? Davin asked. Cafferty struggled to find the words. He was not a man who explained things easily. Humans have a tradition, he said. Once a year, in the cold season, we give gift to children. We hang lights. We put up a tree and decorate it. We fill stockings with small things, candy, toys. We tell the children that someone came in the night and left these things because the children are loved. He paused. It is called Christmas. Davin looked at the cargo bay, then back at Cafferty. And you want to do this here? Tonight, if you will let me. Davin's large dark eyes studied the soldier carefully. The Peluri were good at reading emotions, even across species. What he saw in Cafferty's face was not military efficiency or duty. It was something older and deeper, a need that went down to the bone. I will help you, Davin said. They worked for hours. Cafferty moved slowly because of his leg, but he did not stop. He strung the lights along the walls of the common room first, looping them around the support beams so they hung like tiny stars. Davin held the ladder steady and watched with fascination as the room began to change. They built a tree from branches that Davin cut from the frost-hardened bushes outside. The branches were gray and bare, but Cafferty wrapped them in strips of red and green fabric until the shape looked close enough. He placed a carved wooden star at the top. The stockings went along the far wall, pinned to a length of cord. Cafferty had written each child's name on a scrap of fabric and stitched it to the front. 43 stockings. Some of the names were human. Some were alien names that Cafferty had clearly struggled to spell. He had tried anyway. Into each stocking went a sweet ration, a small carved figure, and a piece of real chocolate wrapped in foil. Fertilla stocking. The smallest one. Cafferty reached into his jacket and pulled out something he had made on the transport. It was a doll, roughly sewn from scraps of synthetic wool, with 2 dark buttons for eyes. It was not beautiful. The stitching was uneven and one arm was longer than the other. But it was soft, and it was made by hands that cared. He placed it gently inside the stocking. Davin watched him. You are in pain, he said quietly that Cafferty's leg was shaking. He had been standing for over 3 hours. I am fine. You're not fine. Sit down. Cafferty sat. He lowered himself into a chair near the window and let out a long breath. The common room glowed with soft white light. The tree stood in the corner, crooked and wrapped in cheap fabric, and somehow it was the most beautiful thing in the room. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Davin said, There is a child watching us. Cafferty turned. In the doorway that led to the sleeping area, a small figure stood half hidden in shadow. Nolly. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized shirt that hung past her knees. Her dark eyes moved across the room. The lights, the tree, the stockings, and then settled on Cafferty. She did not say a word. She just watched. Cafferty looked back at her. He did not wave. He did not smile. He just held her gaze for a moment, one pair of tired eyes meeting another. Then Nolly turned and disappeared back into the dark. Cafferty leaned his head back against the wall. His leg throbbed. His hands ached. Every part of him wanted to sleep. But the room was finished. And tomorrow was Christmas. "Thank you," Davin said softly. Cafferty closed his eyes and said nothing at all. Tilla was the first one to see it. She had woken before the others, the way she always did, silently, with her enormous dark eyes opening all at once like a switch being flipped. She slid off her cot and padded toward the common room on bare blue feet, following the faint glow that leaked through the doorway. She stopped at the entrance. The room was full of light. Small white bulbs hung from the ceiling beams and along the walls, casting a warm, soft glow over everything. In the corner stood something she had never seen before, a shape made from branches, wrapped in colored fabric, with a wooden star sitting on top. Along the far wall, a cord stretched from one end to the other, and hanging from it were dozens of small pouches made from red and green cloth, each one with a name stitched on the front. Tilla did not move. She stood there, perfectly still, with her hands pressed flat against her chest. Behind her, the other children began to wake. That IT started with whispers. Then footsteps. Then the whispers turned into gasps, and the gasps turned into something louder, a sound that Briar Hill had not heard in a very long time. Laughter. Children poured into the common room from every direction. The younger ones ran. The older ones walked slowly, not trusting their eyes. A pair of Sorcerer twins grabbed each other's hands and stared at the lights with their mouths open. A human boy no older than 5 reached out and touched one of the stockings like he thought it might disappear. Brother Davin stood in the corner, watching. His pale fur was ruffled from a night without sleep, but his eyes were bright. "These are for you," he said gently. "Find the one with your name." The room erupted. Children scattered along the wall, searching for their stockings, calling out names, pulling them down with eager hands. The sounds of foil being unwrapped filled the air. A Palurai girl held up a carved wooden animal and turned it over in her long fingers, fascinated. A human boy bit into a piece of chocolate and his eyes went wide. He had never tasted it before. In the middle of the noise, Ren stood frozen. He was staring at the tree. His hand was in his pocket, gripping the folded piece of paper he had carried for months. His drawing of a Christmas tree, done in faded green and yellow. He pulled it out slowly and held it up next to the real thing. The drawing was small and rough. The tree in the corner was crooked and wrapped in cheap fabric. They were both imperfect. They were both exactly right. Ren's chin trembled. He pressed his lips together hard and squeezed the drawing against his chest. He did not cry, but it was a very close thing. Across the room, Tilla had found her stocking. It was the smallest one at the very end of the cord. She pulled it down carefully and reached inside. Her small blue fingers found the foil-wrapped chocolate, the sweet ration, the tiny carved figure. Then she found the doll. It was soft and lumpy, made from scraps of synthetic wool, with 2 dark buttons for eyes and stitching that wandered in crooked lines. One arm was noticeably longer than the other. It was the most imperfect thing in the room. Tilla held it against her chest with both hands. She pressed her face into it, and then, so quietly that only Davin heard it, she made a sound. A hum, low and soft, vibrating in her throat like a tiny engine warming up. Davin's breath caught. In 8 months, Tilla had not made a single sound. Not a whisper, not a cry, not a laugh. The trauma had sealed her voice away completely. And now, holding a lopsided doll made by a soldier's clumsy hands, something inside her had cracked open just enough to let a sound escape. Davin's eyes filled with tears. He turned away so the children would not see. Nolly had not moved from the doorway. She leaned against the frame with her arms crossed, watching the chaos with a hard expression. When Davin approached her with her stocking, she shook her head. "I do not want it." "Nolly, I said no." Davin did not push. He placed the stocking on the nearest chair and walked away. Nolly's eyes moved to the corner of the room where Cafferty sat. The soldier had tucked himself into a chair near the window, trying to take up as little space as possible. His injured leg was stretched out in front of him. He was watching the children with an expression that was hard to read. something between pain and peace. Nolly walked over to him. She stood directly in front of his chair and looked down at him. "Why did you do this?" she asked. "Because I wanted to. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Nolly's jaw tightened. "It does not change anything. People still leave. People still die. There is still no one coming to save us. Santa is not real." Cafferty looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were steady and calm. "You are right," he said. "Santa is not real. No magic is coming. Nobody is going to fly across the sky and fix your life." He leaned forward slightly. "But sometimes a person decides that someone else matters enough to try. That is not a miracle, kid. That is a choice. And choices are real." Nolly stared at him. Her mouth opened, then closed. She turned around and walked back to the chair where Davin had left her stocking. She picked it up and opened it slowly. Inside, beneath the chocolate and the sweet ration, was a small hand-carved wooden star. She held it in her palm and closed her fingers around it. She did not smile, but she held it tight. When she looked back toward the window, Cafferty's chair was empty. Through the frosted glass, she could see him limping slowly toward his transport in the pale morning light, but he did not look back. Captain Hessa Lowry did not raise her voice. She never needed to. She sat behind her desk at Fort Dawnridge with her hands folded and her eyes fixed on Cafferty like a surgeon examining a wound. The office was small and cold. There was nothing on the walls. The only light came from a single panel overhead that hummed faintly. Cafferty stood at attention. His leg ached from the drive back, but he kept his weight even and his face blank. "The supply manifest shows a 4-hour deviation from your assigned route," Lowry said. "You stopped at Millward Station. That stop was not authorized." "No, ma'am. Your personal sidearm, an antique firearm registered to your service record, is no longer in your possession. You traded it at Millward." "Yes, ma'am." "For chocolate." "Yes, ma'am." Lowry studied him. She had served 22 years in the military. She had seen soldiers do stupid things for every reason imaginable: greed, fear, love, boredom. But this was a new one. "Explain," she said. Cafferty did not make excuses. He told her exactly what he had done and why. The detour, the purchases, the lights, the stockings, the gifts, the tree. He told her about the children at Briar Hill, about the cold common room, about the small blue girl who had not spoken in 8 months. He told her about Christmas. He spoke plainly, without emotion, the way a soldier gives a field report. When he finished, he said, "I will accept whatever discipline you think is appropriate, Captain." Lowry was quiet for a long time. 2 weeks confined to base," she said. 1 week's pay docked." She paused. "And, Cafferty, next time you want to do something like this, file a proper requisition form. That way I can look the other way officially instead of having to sit here and pretend I am angry." Cafferty blinked. It was the closest he had come to showing surprise in years. "Dismissed," Lowry said. He saluted and left. Lowry waited until the door closed. Then she opened her terminal and began drafting a letter to the Galactic Cooperative Council. The subject line read, "Proposal for Morale and Cultural Enrichment Fund for Frontier Orphanages." She did not mention Cafferty by name. She did not need to point 300 miles away. Briar Hill was changing to IT happened slowly, the way thawing happens, not all at once, but in small cracks and shifts that you only noticed when you stepped back and looked at the whole picture. Ren was the first to change. The day after Christmas, he sat down with the younger children and told them about another Earth tradition, New Year. He described how people would count down from 10 and then cheer when the number reached 0, celebrating the idea that something new was beginning. The children practiced counting backward all afternoon. A Peluri boy kept counting past 0 in negative numbers, and everyone laughed, including Ren. He started teaching them songs after that. Simple ones, the kind he remembered from before the war. He did not have a good voice, but that did not matter. What mattered was that he was sharing something instead of hiding it. Tilla continued to hum. She hummed in the morning. She hummed at meals. She hummed while sitting on her cot, holding the lopsided doll against her chest. Brother Davin contacted the colony's medical center and spoke with a child psychologist who told him that the humming was a very good sign, a bridge between silence and speech. The psychologist scheduled weekly visits, and Nolly Nolly was the hardest to read. She did not talk about Christmas. She did not mention the soldier or the tree or the lights. She went through her days the same way she always had, sharp-eyed, watchful, protective of the younger ones. But something had shifted. One afternoon, a small alien boy, a sorcerer no older than 4, tugged on her sleeve and asked, "Will the soldier come back?" The old Nolly would have said no. She would have said that people leave and they do not come back, and hoping otherwise was a waste of time. She had said things like that 100 times before. But instead, she paused. She looked down at the boy's wide dark eyes and said, "I do not know. Maybe." It was not hope. Not exactly. But it was the absence of despair. And on a frontier world full of orphans, that was worth more than anyone could measure. Like a tea night, after the other children were asleep, Nolly would sit on her cot and hold the wooden star in her hands. She would turn it over and over, feeling the smooth carved edges with her fingertips. Then she would place it carefully on the windowsill above her cot, angled so it caught the first light of morning. She never told anyone why. But every night, without fail, the star was there, Brother David noticed. He noticed all of it, the singing, the humming, the small shift in Nolly's armor. He wrote it all down in his nightly reports, the same reports he sent to the council every month that nobody ever seemed to read. This time, he added a line at the bottom. A human soldier came here on the coldest night of the year and reminded these children that they had not been forgotten. I do not fully understand his tradition, but I understand what it did. For the first time since I began caring for these children, they're not just surviving. They're beginning to live. He sent the report and turned off the light. Outside, the winter wind blew hard across Haven's Rest. But inside Briar Hill, the battery-powered lights still hung along the walls, glowing softly, and nobody had asked to take them down. The note arrived folded inside a supply requisition form, tucked between a request for blankets and an order for water filters. Cafferty almost missed it. He was processing paperwork in the quartermaster's office at Fort Donridge, 2 weeks into his confinement, when a thin slip of paper fell out of the stack and landed on his boot. He picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was tall and careful, written by someone whose first language was not English. "Sergeant Cafferty, I hope you are well. I wanted you to know that the girl, Tilla, spoke her first word today. The psychologist says she is making very good progress." The word she said was star. I believe she was looking at the doll you made for her when she said it, though I cannot be certain. The children still talk about Christmas morning. Ren has taught them 4 songs. Even the Sorcerer twins are learning the words, though they sing in the wrong key. Thank you for what you did. It mattered more than I can say. Brother David. Cafferty read the note twice. Then he folded it along the same creases and slipped it into his chest pocket over his heart. He sat there for a while, alone in the quiet office, with his hand resting flat against the pocket. He went back to work. The weeks passed. Cafferty completed his confinement, returned to regular duty, and did not talk about what he had done. The other soldiers at Fort Donridge heard rumors, something about a detour, a traded sidearm, an orphanage, but Cafferty said nothing when they asked, so eventually they stopped asking. What Cafferty did not know was that Brother David had done something unusual. He had written about Christmas morning on the colony's communication channel, a public network that connected all the settlements and outposts on Haven's Rest to each other and to the wider cooperative. The post was simple. David described what he had seen. A human soldier, injured and exhausted, arriving in the middle of the night with a cargo bay full of lights and gifts and chocolate. He described the children's faces. He described Tilla's hum. He described Nolly's wooden star. He did not name Cafferty. He simply called him the soldier. The post spread slowly at first, then faster. Settlers on neighboring colonies read it and shared it. Traders carried it to the next system. Within a month, it had reached the core worlds. The reactions were mixed, the way reactions always are when humans do something that other species cannot quite explain. That a Pellurai diplomat read the post during a council session and brought it up during a break. He told his colleagues that humans were the only species in the entire cooperative who invented reasons to give things to strangers. He called it irrational. Then he paused for a moment, scratched behind one of his tall ears, and added that it might be the most important thing humans had ever taught the galaxy, but a sorcerer biologist wrote a response arguing that the behavior was a survival instinct, that humans, having evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill them, had learned that caring for the weakest members of their group was the key to the whole group surviving. She said it was not irrational at all. It was the most rational thing a Death World species could do, that a retired Pellurai general, who had fought alongside human soldiers during the border conflicts, simply wrote, "I have seen humans carry wounded enemies to safety. I have seen them weep over fallen opponents. I have seen them share their last rations with prisoners of war. And now I learn they also build trees out of sticks and fabric and give chocolate to orphans in the middle of the night. I'm no longer surprised by anything humans do. I'm only grateful they're on our side." None of this reached Cafferty. He did not read the colony channels. He did not know that people across the galaxy were talking about what he had done. He went on supply runs. He did his physical therapy. He slept when his leg let him and stared at the ceiling when it did not. But he kept Davin's note in his chest pocket every single day. Back at Briar Hill, the winter was beginning to ease. The days were getting longer. The heating system still groaned, the walls were still patched metal, and the food was still bland. Nothing about the building had changed, but the children had changed. Rin had become something like a teacher. He held story time in the evenings now, telling the younger ones about Earth, not just the sad parts, but the good parts too. Mountains, oceans, Zen. He told them about snow, and a sorcerer boy asked if it was like the white dust that fell on their homeworld. Rin said he thought it was probably close enough that Tilla's vocabulary was growing. She said star and no and more. And one morning while Davin was serving breakfast, she looked up at him and said thank you in a voice so small it was barely a whisper. Davin had to leave the room for a moment after that, and Nolly, on a quiet evening, long after the lights were dimmed, Nolly sat on her cot by the window. Tilla was beside her, asleep, the lopsided doll tucked under her arm. The wooden star sat on the windowsill, catching the faint light from the battery-powered bulbs that still hung along the walls at a younger child. A human girl of about 5 wandered over in her nightgown, unable to sleep. "Nolly," she whispered, "do you believe in Santa now?" Nolly looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the soldier with the bad leg and the rough hands. She thought about the truck full of chocolate and lights. She thought about choices. "No," she said, "I do not believe in Santa." The girl's face fell. "But," Nolly continued, "I believe in soldiers who drive through the cold in the middle of the night because they decided that a bunch of kids they have never met are worth the trouble." She picked up the wooden star and turned it in her fingers. "And maybe that is close enough." The girl thought about this. Then she nodded seriously, the way children do when they have decided something is true, and padded back to her cot. Nolly placed the star back on the windowsill. Outside, the colony of Haven's Rest stretched out under a dark sky filled with more stars than anyone could count. The wind had gone quiet. The frost was thin on the ground. And there, at the edge of the settlement, the orphanage called Briar Hill glowed faintly in the night, a small, stubborn point of warmth against the vast, cold frontier. The lights were still on. Nobody had asked to take them down.